Aiken Buckingham was a member of, he was born actually in Lebanon, Connecticut, and like a lot of folks from the rural areas of Connecticut, he moved to Norwich along with some of his relatives to make his fortune. Remember, Norwich was the big city back in the early 1800s. He went into the dry goods business, but then 1840s he had a stroke of genius. He invested in a new industry that was like the dot-coms or the computer, the latest high-tech stuff, and that was the rubber industry. Buckingham became basically a millionaire on rubber. He invested in this new technology. He prospered exceedingly, and in 1847 he built this Italianate mansion right here on East Main or Main Street in Norwich. Originally it was covered with stucco. He lived here through the Civil War. He was a Whig and then became, like Lincoln, a Republican. He was running for re-election as governor in 1860. Remember, in 1860, it was a very sort of complex political landscape out there. You had a number of different parties vying for position. Connecticut was basically the New Republicans and the Democrats, and it was very, very, very close. The Democratic candidate for governor was a man who was a hero and had been a hero in the Mexican War, very well-liked. I think it was Thomas Seymour. Seymour and Buckingham were the campaigns were being run basically by the state committees. Back at that time, the major candidates, like for governor, president, and so forth, didn't do any campaigning. They stayed at home. Lincoln's campaign was actually, before he was even nominated, that Cooper Union speech that he repeated in New England, not just here in Connecticut, but in Rhode Island and so forth, Massachusetts, I believe, and New Hampshire, that was reprinted, spread all over the country, and read in newspapers and his pamphlets, accompanied by his photograph by Brady. And Lincoln, meanwhile, didn't even attend the Republican National Convention because you didn't do that. He had his friend Judge Davis and other sort of operatives make the deals and orchestrate the whole thing, and got the nomination for president. The same thing was true of others. So when Buckingham is running, Lincoln gets invited to Connecticut by the Republican State Committee because they want him here as a national figure, having won fame in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They want him here to prop up Governor Buckingham so that Buckingham will prevail. And in fact, in the spring elections in April 1860, Buckingham squeaked through by literally a razor-thin margin. I think it's just almost nothing. It's like some of the races today. But he and Lincoln became, I think, sort of political allies in a very important sense, and Connecticut played a very important role in helping to arm the Union Army during the Civil War. Buckingham actually, when the war broke out, not only pledged his own money, but even had 2 cannon cast at his expense to help equip the first Connecticut troops. So I mean, he was very committed to it. He was committed to the war, committed to the end of slavery. He was a very unappreciated person in many respects. Simply an amazing person. We still have in his house some of the furnishings of the house. We have a cannonball that was sent him by the Connecticut troops that took Fort Pulaski in Georgia. We have his, when he was in the Senate, U.S. Senate, late 60s and 1870s, they were doing an investigation of the Ku Klux Klan. And the published investigation of the Klan is actually in the House now. A number of volumes by state. He was very active in issues like civil rights and so forth. One small problem with him, which I suppose people are teaching for their own time, Buckingham was supportive of the right of African Americans to vote. The state of Connecticut, voters in the state had actually turned that down in 1864. Norwich had voted for the right of black males to vote. And Buckingham was in support of that. But Governor Buckingham was definitely opposed to any thought of women being given the right to vote.
Isn't that progressive?
It doesn't matter what good he did.
I know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to burst your bubble, Joanne.
Okay, so the Whigs were Democrats and the Republicans were the abolitionists, or the Republicans were the liberals and the Democrat Whigs.
It's more complicated than that. The current Democratic Party is actually the oldest extant political party in the world. And it dates back to Thomas Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists.
Right.
But they didn't call themselves Democrats, they called themselves Republicans.
Okay.
The Whig Party was actually formed after the demise of the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party were the ones that supported the U.S. Constitution. They weren't too keen on the Bill of Rights, that kind of got foisted off on them. Connecticut was a Federalist stronghold. And one reason was that, we weren't keen. Connecticut didn't ratify the Bill of Rights, We didn't like that part about freedom of religion. The Congregational Church was the state church in Connecticut until 1818. So it's a very complicated landscape. What killed the Federalist Party was the War of 1812, when they had the Hartford Convention. New England was prepared to secede from the United States in protest against the war, but then darn, that Andrew Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans, and he got a peace treaty that, sort of honorable, and now the Federalists were like traitors. So the voters of Connecticut dumped the Federalists right after the War of 1812, and they elected the Democratic Republicans, whatever, the Jeffersonian Party, and they wrote a new state constitution disestablishing the church. So even Connecticut, the land of steady habits, had change. Change is always something difficult for us to deal with. But,
So Buckingham would have been an abolitionist.
Buckingham probably, yes, he would have been. Well, let's say there were many different shades of people against slavery. He was definitely anti-slavery. The abolitionists were regarded as being the radicals. I mean, the real radicals. And then you had the ultras, who were more radical than a radical.
Like William Lloyd Garrison.
Right, yeah. Right. William Lloyd Garrison was way out there. William Lloyd Garrison actually believed that women should be able to participate in the anti-slavery movement. God, can you imagine that? He was obviously very unpopular for a lot of people.
like the Black Panthers.
So the anti-slavery movement actually split over the question of the involvement of women in the 1840s. Yes, 1830s, 1840s. One group became the Republican Party. They were kind of the political abolitionists. The non-political kind of, who were in favor of women being participants and so forth. Garrison was was probably the most notable leader of that. they said no union with slaveholders. They burned the U.S. Constitution publicly and said no, that the Constitution was a covenant with death and slavery and so on. So, see, a lot of people said, "Ooh, abolitionists bad," very bad. And you had every shade in between. You had the ultras like Stephen Foster, not the songwriter. Stephen Foster from, I think, New Hampshire. Abby Kelly from Lynn. They later got married. Kelly was one of the very first women to speak publicly. Women could not speak in public in the early 19th century. When Prudence Crandall was brought before the town, basically on kind of charges of starting the school, she couldn't speak in her own defense. She had to bring in Arnold Buffin and the Unitarian minister from Brooklyn, Connecticut, Samuel May, to speak on her behalf before the town meeting. It's incredible. So, with Abby Kelly, who visited here a number of times, lived later in Worcester, actually was one of the first to speak publicly. Her husband, Stephen Foster, specialized in going into a church, walking in, and publicly denouncing the minister and the congregation for failing to oppose slavery and for not taking a stand against it, and he would be grabbed bodily and thrown down the stone steps of the church. This happened on a number of occasions. Those were the ultras. And then you had John Brown, who was probably more ultra than the ultras, who decided to take it a step beyond that, and actually the ultras were pacifists. They were, they did not believe in violence. Garrison was a pacifist. The Civil War tried this pacifist feelings a lot. So it's an incredibly complicated situation, and there just weren't abolitionists and people who weren't abolitionists. There were every shade in between. Yes?
How long did Governor Buckingham reign as governor?
Governor was elected every year in Connecticut in the spring, April.
Wow.
I think he'd been elected in 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 64, 65, 66. I think he finally quit after 67. And then he became senator, U.S. senator, and then died in office.
Is he buried here in Norwich?
Yes, he's got a very nice monument.
Oh.
Yeah, Yantic Cemetery.
Yantic Cemetery.
Well worth seeing. And there was a tour of the exit. Yes.
Question just about the town layout at this time. Where was the train station and steamship lines?
The steamboats by the time Lincoln visited in '60 would have come right up to where Howard Brown Park is now.
Okay.
Howard Brown Park is actually built on the ruins of the old steamboat, dock. And then you transfer onto a train. The train station was it's not too far from where the current train station is, right in back of